Alright, welcome back to my second screencast. This one is, again, talking about accessibility, but I decided to use it's a PDF file, which was actually converted from slides from a Smartboard presentation. It would have been actually ActiveInspire format, but I don't have that on my home laptop, so I just converted it to a PDF, which I thought would be an easier format to work with. So what you're looking at is basically the notes that I did in class that actually go with a portion of the quiz that I showed you in the earlier video. Again, this is talking about solving quadratic equations and then connecting that to the graphing, which we looked at a little bit more in section 5.2. So just to sort of scroll through and show you some of the content here. As you can see, I like to use color and underlining to try to highlight important information. Okay, so here I have my first numerical example, putting up the original function, running through the steps, how to do those things, and then a couple more examples once we've gone through the steps in greater detail. And again, as you can see, the use of color throughout to sort of focus your attention on more important things in the presentation. So as I was sort of considering this for accessibility, I felt like I'm not sure how accessible it would be unless it were to maybe be retyped, because I don't know that most of the tools that could convert this to a more accessible format would work going from a handwritten format into sort of like a reader. Adobe, I was looking at the tools, and they do have this button for clicking accessibility, but if you'll notice, it does take you to this page where they charge a fee, and again, I'm not so sure exactly how that service works, or if they could even convert things like that to the format we'd be wanting, but I did see that option. Not sure how it would work here, though. In the accessibility handbook, they mentioned something called OCR, optical character recognition, and again, I'm not so sure that that would work, converting handwritten notes into another format. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure if that would be applicable here. So again, since we're relating this to teaching online primarily, if I were doing this presentation, like I said, I'd probably convert it to a typed format instead of the handwritten, just for maybe legibility purposes and formatting. Also, the fact that sometimes when I'm writing on the board, I don't necessarily include all of the detail, because I may sort of having the students take notes as I'm talking about it, and maybe I don't write everything verbatim on the screen. So, for instance, down here where I talk about possible sign combinations, I just write the symbols. I don't necessarily say positive and negative. Maybe that's assumed, maybe it's not, but that's something I would actually mention when I'm talking about it. But as you can see, I didn't actually spell out positive and negative there. So just to reference a couple of the UDL principles, the first one about multiple means of representation, and as I mentioned earlier, I do try to use color and underlining to point out those key elements. And again, if I were doing this not only in class, or I could use it as like a collaborate session, as we did with Blackboard in another module, is to use an online grapher. So here we had this function in my first example, and as we went down to the solution, we found that 2 and 6 would solve this quadratic. If we were to plug them in, we would get zeros, and those would be equivalent to our roots, as I mentioned on the first slide. And so I could show that more accurately with this tool called Desmos, and I think another classmate or two used this in an earlier presentation, and I actually just used it yesterday afternoon when I was tutoring someone for pre-calc. One of her exercises, we wanted to sort of make sure that we were on the right track. We threw the function in, and we're able to double check our work. So there's the 2 and the 6. So we still have that quadratic shape, and we could reinforce the fact that we have our roots where we expected them to be, just to sort of have another tool in the arsenal there. So the other principle I wanted to mention was the one about means of understanding, and as you can see, my first example, I start off, and this is how I usually run most of my notes, with explicit steps, breaking everything into pieces, and having that more elaborate detail, and then as we can continue through the lesson, backing off as much of that explicit detail, since I've already shown it in a previous example, and sort of condensing it down into the essential parts. So here again you have everything we would need to begin, highlighting what you start with, what you would see when you're given a problem, where you need to begin, what your factors are, what your signs need to be, how to write it as binomials, and then again, this is something I'd probably mention in class, what a binomial actually is. I didn't write the definition here, but I would talk about it. And again, showing that work to get to our solutions. And yeah, again, here were just a few more examples here at the end. The other tool I wanted to mention, because I did talk about it a couple times in terms of the colors and highlighting that I like to use, was here, and I think I got this from the online accessibility handbook. I think that's where the link was, but here you can see it up there if you'd like to check it out. The color contrast analyzer, and I actually did download this and play around with this a little bit, so let me show you how that looks. So if I have my tool here, so there's the contrast analyzer. This is sort of telling you a couple things, and that is you can sort of pick what you want your background and foreground or your text to be, different color combinations, and it'll tell you is this a good idea to use or not in terms of ideal visibility for people with visual problems. I think most specifically different variations of color blindness. So black and white is all good. If we change the background to maybe a dark blue with a black, obviously that fails everything. If we change our text to white on blue, though, that's all good. If we go back to a white background and maybe a green, that's one that I thought maybe would have been okay, but apparently that contrast ratio is unacceptable based on these criteria. So you can sort of play around with that and see, which colors are ideal. I think the orange you can see in the back may actually not have been a good idea to use for my axis of symmetry here. Apparently that fails orange on white, so I might choose something different for that in the future. The other cool thing about this tool was you can actually sort of have this window and simulate what it would look like if you were looking at it through the lens of color blindness. So there's all these different types depending on what kind of colors you can see or not see, or what wavelengths your eyes can perceive properly or not. So you can see how the presentation switches based on which version of color blindness I choose. The other one is cataracts, where everything's kind of blurry. So I just thought that was an interesting feature to sort of actually have that perspective. Since we, it's kind of hard to put yourself in someone's shoes like that, but right there you get a chance to. And again, the reason I also really wanted to focus on the visuals of this is that that issue is near and dear to me. About 10 years ago, my mom lost the vision in a large part of one of her eyes due to a medical condition, and ever since then, my family and I have been, and obviously her, have had to come up with ways to adapt to that. You know, accessibility features on her phone, larger fonts, better contrast, higher brightness on her devices. Um, she's had to obviously adapt to her driving ability. She can't drive at night anymore, but um, she was able to adapt to driving during the day after she learned how to compensate for having that loss in her visual field. So that accommodation is sort of familiar to me in terms of the context of my family and my mom and how she's dealt with that. So uh, I just wanted to note that as we were talking about it. So I believe, again, that's all I wanted to mention about this document. So thank you again for taking the time, and have a good day.